time was when the words Tour de France meant the world's greatest bicycle race. But this event calls for 4 wheels on the ground, as often as possible, that is. For this is Le Tour Auto, perhaps the pattern for European rallies of the future. Some call it the racing driver's rally, but this is only a half-truth. The road sections, which connect virtually every circuit and speed hill climb in France, provide an itinerary of over 3,000 miles, and whoever heard of a racing driver working for 8 consecutive days? Anyway, be it on the circuits, the cols, or the open roads, Peter Harper and Peter Proctor are equally at home. 2 more namesakes, the Rosemarys, Smith and Sears, the distaff side of the Roots Group team, which is completed by Keith Balasat and Tiny Lewis. This story starts at Rouen and the circuit of Les Essarts. It is the story of 3 Sunbeam Rapiers. It is told in their own words by the drivers. Keith Balasat.
Rouen, well, it's a fabulous circuit. It's set in the woods with a lovely sort of up and downhill road, very good surface, except for the hairpin, which is on more or less cobblestones, and very wicked.
Peter Harper.
We started in engine category size, which meant that I would right at the back of the grid. I had to get through all the Citroens, all the Volvos, etc. And Rouen is quite a narrow circuit. And from the start, you go downhill through some very fast swerves, about the 100-mile-an-hour mark. And I was trying to overtake these characters on the outside round these bends. I actually got through the lot up to the last Jaguar by the time we got to the hairpin at the bottom, but it was quite hairy.
And what of Rosemary Smith in her first big international event?
Rouen was the first one on the Saturday that we started, and I think my idea here was that I must not blow up the car or do something stupid on the first circuit, so I'm afraid I was a bit slow on it. It was a nice circuit.
As the Tour left Rouen, the Rapiers were first and second in their class. But it is on the road sections that teamwork counts, and the partnership of Peter Harper and Peter Proctor is a long-standing one.
It was very simple. As far as the road sections were concerned, he drove one, then I drove the next. I tried to work it so all mine were short ones without him knowing, but it didn't work very well.
But of all rallies, the Tour de France calls for servicing. Keith Balasat.
That was absolutely terrific. The Roots people really went to town, as one must in an event like this, because the time for servicing the vehicles is an absolute minimum. It has to be done in your running time.
So, to perhaps the most famous circuit of them all, and another 2-hour race. Here, the male crews switched drivers, as Tiny Lewis explains.
Before the start of the rally, we talked over which hill climbs and which circuits we knew, and we sorted it out like that, which seemed to be the most sensible way of doing it.
And with past Le Mans experience and Formula Junior racing behind him, Peter Proctor sprints into action.
Well, I must admit it is a bit worrying, but it's very much like Formula Junior driving, I suppose. Very tight, packed group. It took 2 or 3 circuits before we got to know who the idiots were, and we kept a close watch on them, of course, and tried to keep a good distance from them. But the majority of the drivers were very sensible and drove very well.
And after that laconic comment from Peter Proctor, watch him in action with Rapier number 75 as he laps Le Mans at over 90 miles an hour. Tiny Lewis and Rosemary Smith keep company for a while, but it's not all plain sailing.
We had a shower of rain towards the end of the race on one side of the circuit. This took us by surprise somewhat. Me particularly, I stuck it into the sand for a minute. I got it out all right though, but it is a particularly treacherous circuit when it can be sun shining on one side of the circuit, of course, and raining on the other.
Meantime, Tiny Lewis here, number 74, had also been delayed when a piece of flexible air duct fouled the fan. There was some tension at the pits, but the Rapiers, now regaining ground, were still very much in the hunt. As he signals from the pit, what does Lewis Gérard think of the drivers?
Well, they frightened us to death. We were quite convinced they were all raving mad, and we have been for a long time. But we have never have any ambition to be rally drivers ourselves, and we have a great respect for them. They realise that without us, I suppose that they'd be in trouble, and we realise without them we wouldn't get the results, and results are the most important things.
But as Rosemary Smith remembers, there was still a long, long way to go.
It was very long. It was 9 days, and even though we had stops usually before and after these race circuits, it still was tiring. The road sections themselves, though some of them went at very high average speed, they were still tiring.
Next stop, Clermont-Ferrand and the circuit of the Auvergne.
That's one of the most exhilarating circuits in Europe, similar in a way, of course, to Nürburgring, but not so long, and therefore it's possible for a newcomer to learn the circuit much quicker.
And unlike Rosemary Smith, Keith Balasat is no newcomer to racing. But team manager Norman Garrett had reason to be proud of his confidence in the young Irish girl. The battle for the ladies' prize was developing into a duel between Rosemary and the very experienced Annie Soisbault. Both well worth watching. As the Auvergne circuit gets underway, let's hear again the driver's point of view. Keith Balasat.
Well, we ran across the road to the motor cars, and it was about a lap before I had the chance to fasten the safety belts. It's absolutely a driver's circuit. The surface is very good, but you're going through corners fast and slow nearly all the time. There's no period where you can relax and sort of go down a mile straight.
And there is Keith Balasat illustrating his comment. But what of Peter Harper on Rapier 75?
It is one of the best circuits I think I've driven on because it is very twisty. It's a driver's circuit, but there isn't any room for mistake, because if you do make a mistake there, as you come into one bend, for instance, braking down from over the 100-mile-an-hour mark into a left-hander, as you look over the bank in front of you, you can see Clermont-Ferrand about 2,000 feet below.
The Auvergne to Albi. 500 miles of twisting road section through the mountains of the Massif Central, and no time to spare, despite long sections between controls. The effect of the Tour de France upon the local inhabitants all adds to the stature of the event, as Keith Balasat observes.
I think it's one of the most intriguing events in the calendar. It's different from the normal championship rally insofar as you have such a large number of circuits, and I think it makes the event very interesting. Normal rallies in Europe are tending to be restricted because of police and public opinion against cars chasing through villages and populated areas, and I think the pattern of the Tour de France is something that will have to come in a bigger way for future events.
Albi, 48 hours after the start, and a 1-hour race on the tight little 2-mile circuit. Throughout the event, the international rules of racing apply. There is a separate briefing for every circuit, and the standard of organization is of the highest. The setting is delightful, and Peter Proctor adjusts his mirror with some care. From the word go, Proctor gets stuck into the opposition.
Yes, Albi I liked as well. Again, it's a very twisty circuit. There is quite a long straight on it, but it is a purpose-made circuit, and the circuit is off the road, of course. The corners are banked slightly.
Just as well, perhaps, in his case. Meantime, Rosemary Smith was also hard at it.
Albi I enjoyed very much. It was flat and it was just right for the Rapiers. We just sort of kept there and it really was very good.
4 circuits completed, 3 to go. But the mountains lay ahead, and in them some of the world's most exacting hill climbs, to say nothing of the road section, which had even Peter Harper trying.
This year, they put in a very tight section down in the Pyrenees area somewhere, which caught a lot of people out. We had 2 minutes in hand, going very hard.
Col de Tourmalet, high in the Pyrenees, over 7 miles of steep and tortuous climb, but no great problem for Peter Proctor.
We've done quite a lot of the hill climbs before, of course, on other rallies. Some we have got quite used to, but the ones in the Pyrenees are fairly new to us. We have recorded them, but the ones in the Massa Central and other places like Mont Ventoux, we do know fairly well, so they were no surprise to us.
But by now, the field was dwindling. Accidents and mechanical failures had taken a heavy toll, while the Rapier team continued steadily to improve their position. Next circuit, Pau, and opinions differ.
Pau's a very interesting circuit.
Pau I didn't like so much.
Fabulous. Of all the circuits, I like Pau the best.
Evidently, the locals agree with Peter Proctor.
It's very twisty, very similar to Monaco in lots of ways. No straights on it at all. Plenty of variation, different types of corners. A wonderful surface, and it suits the Rapier down to the ground. Unfortunately, I destroyed the life work of 54 gardeners in about 3/5 of a second. A Mini Cooper spun in front of me at Pau, and this was on a twisty little bit, and I had the choice of shunting him or taking to the scenery. I chose the latter and went over a very expensive looking flower bed without any damage to the car, but I'm afraid quite a lot of damage to the flower bed.
There are so many different types of car on the circuit the whole time, and you're either overtaking or being overtaken practically the whole hour or 2 hours of the race.
And if the spectators find this thirsty work, what of the drivers?
The corners can be learned, of course, but the only trouble is we don't get the amount of practice. If you haven't driven on the circuit before, you get 2 or 3 laps of practice, which isn't really enough to be able to drive the car on the limit.
Mind you, the definition of on the limit varies from driver to driver, but Peter Proctor certainly isn't hanging about at the wheel of Rapier number 75. Rosemary Smith looks tense.
It's very tight, very twisty, and there seemed to be an awful lot of high brick walls around the place. I just didn't like it so much.
Southeastwards now to the Mediterranean coast, and then homeward bound at last, as the route turned north for the hill climb of Mont Ventoux on the 4th day of the event. And now the tour was in the familiar rally country of Provence and the Maritime Alps. Next test, the 5-mile hill climb of the Col de Bryce, and the Harper Proctor crew were worried.
Well, I've done that so many times now, I should know it, but you never really know as well as you should. It is a series of hairpins. I don't know how many there are, about 12, I think in succession. Well, after Albi, quite early on, our overdrive stopped working, and so every hill climb we did on the whole event bar one, we had to do without overdrive, and which meant that we had to drive in a way that we shouldn't. We were approaching bends much quicker to try and keep way on because we were pulling a higher gear all the time than we should. And we went round some bends in a most unorthodox manner.
but the rally-bred Rapier can withstand such punishment.
Oh, it was amazing the way it stood up to it. It really should have stopped. I mean, it had every reason to stop because we were using about 1,000 revs more than we should have done for 6 out of the 8 days.
The excitement of the tour now mounted as the competition entered its final phase, and Rosemary Smith found herself with a heavy load of responsibility in her first major continental event.
Most of the way through the rally, Annie Soisbault had been leading in scratch and we had been leading in handicap. And then on about the second last day, we were told that Annie had fallen out, that the Jag had broken down. And we knew that if we could finish, we would win this scratch as well. Well, we just didn't want to stop to think about it, actually. We just kept our fingers crossed and kept going.
Now comes the long road section up the eastern frontier of France. A tiring journey? Well, not for the likes of Peter Harper.
Not really, because the longest time you do is a day and a night, and then you get a night's sleep. So, really, it's not too tiring. I had an idea then I'd like it very much, and this year confirmed it. It is one of the most fabulous events I've ever done. I think the things that we learn on the Tour de France, which are then built into the motor cars, is an advantage to the man who buys a motor car. There is no doubt about this.
The only frontier on the entire tour, the crossing into Belgium, and it presented no problem. And from there, it's a swift run through the Ardennes to Francorchamps and the Spa circuit. 8 miles to the lap, mountainous but very fast, and another 2 hours of racing ahead. Lewis Garrett.
Servicing on the tour is a process of changing tyres. Our biggest problem was getting the right tyres at the right place in enough time. This involved quite a lot of motoring for the service cars, and was very tiring for us as well. Well, the drivers won't agree with me, but I think we work a lot harder, but never mind.
And at the wheel of Rapier number 75 at Spa is Peter Harper.
Spa is in the dry, a wonderful track. In the wet, a horrible one. It's quite a frightening track to be on. As you dash down past the pits, you come to a left kink and then a right-hand sweep uphill. Well, I was approaching that at around about 90 miles an hour, and then using the whole road, starting on the right-hand side and finishing up on the left, and the bank getting nearer and nearer, and hoping every lap. And this went on for 2 hours, which seemed like 2 days.
Rapier 74, Keith Ballasett.
It's very, very easy to make a mistake in the rain, and a mistake at Spa would be absolutely disastrous.
The pace of the racing, the long road sections, the hammering of the hill climbs, all took their toll. Only 51 of the 162 starters were to finish, and the position of the Rapier team improved with every punishing mile. Number 76, Rosemary Smith.
Well, I'd heard so much about Spa and what a fabulous circuit it was, and it certainly turned out to be, but it was a pity it was so wet. It was very slippy, and it was a marvellous circuit, though, it really was.
Spa to Reims, back into France, and the last run in. The Tour de France approaches its climax. As one would expect of a French event, the Tour finishes as it starts on a Sunday. And the Continental Sunday has its points. Peter Proctor, who's raced here before, clicks for the last 2 hours of racing. picture with the now leading Rapier, number 74.
Oh yes, we were always pretty close together at Reims, where Proctor showed me the correct lines through all the corners in practice, which was a great help. And then in the race, in actual fact, we stayed glued together for several laps.
From the pits, team manager Norman Garrett once again watches the three Rapiers reel off the final miles of the long, hard road to success. The Tour now attracts more public attention than any rally in France, and great was the crowd's response to the undisputed victory of Rosemary Smith and Rosemary Sears in both the ladies' prizes, for they were the only all-girl crew to finish. With their teammates, they brought the Rapiers a brilliant first, second and third places in their class. They were second in the manufacturer's team prize, and Balasat and Lewis were sixth in the general classification. But, last word, of course, to the ladies.
Well, the tour was very exciting, very interesting, and the whole thing, the organisation and the way the cars ran and everything really just turned out very well.